What's up, y'all? Pastor Darren here. I wanted to start today's message with a personal note for you to know about me. Over the last couple of months, I've really been thinking and praying about my role here at the church and really what the best fit is for me. And I wanted to let you know that after a lot of prayer, a lot of counsel, a lot of wisdom, a lot of mentorship conversations with my wife, I've decided to step down as senior pastor at New Life Church. This has been a decision that I have not taken lightly. In fact, pretty much the whole summer, I've been thinking and praying and journaling and talking about this very subject to God. And I sense peace and confidence that this is the right move for me and for my family. And I just wanted to thank you for your encouragement and your support through the years. I've been senior pastor about 8 or 9 months, but I've actually been on staff here over 5 years. And I learned this week that our building has been open 9 years as of last week. And I think about that, and some of you may be thinking, wow, already? Time goes really fast, especially when God is doing a lot of good things. And I'm so confident that I can say that I've seen God do a lot of great things here at the church. Not just in the last year, but in the last 9 years, and even before that. And here's what I know: God will continue to do good things in the near future. How do I know that? It's because that's what he does. And his kingdom is not built just on one person or a group of people. It continues through time, and it evolves, and it changes. But his kingdom will continue to be built, whether or not I'm here, whether or not you are here. New Life Church will continue to reach people and to make a place for them to know God and to grow and to go. The language may change, how we do that will always change. But as we're going to learn today, God has always used people in different leadership positions to lead in the seasons that they're in. And really, that's my prayer for you. And I hope that you'll pray for me and my family as we look at transitioning, that we would just continue to be willing to trust God to do new things, to try things out. And I would rather have lived my life taking lots of risks and failing along the way than to just stay the same and to be comfortable and to never, ever want to switch things up. I've been actually born and raised here in Solano County, and so there's a lot of memories, a lot of things to celebrate in my life. And I know that God will continue to work here through you and through what God continues to do at New Life Church. Today is the last Sunday. By the way, if you have any questions or you want to talk, I'll be around until the end of the month. You can email me. You can send me a text message. I'll be in person at our Vacaville campuses, except for 1 week I'll be out of town, the week leading up to Thanksgiving. But I'd be happy to connect with you and hear what God's doing in your life and your questions that you might have, and I'll do my best to answer them. And I just would really appreciate your prayers as we look at leading in a different way in the near future. And really, you are a leader in some way, shape, or form. You might be leading your family. You might be leading in the workplace, in the classroom, within your friend group. Today, it's all about leadership, one of my favorite topics. And today we're talking about personalities of leadership, how you and I lead. We're going to be looking at 4 different people and how they've led through the Bible. And a lot of this comes from the John Maxwell Leadership Bible. And the first person we're talking about today, by the way, it's the last week of our series, Inside Out. Hope you've enjoyed this series, learning about yourself and asking God some big questions. If you couldn't tell, I have been asking myself some big questions through the months. And a lot of the things that we've been talking about this past month have come a lot from my own personal journals and questions and thoughts. And feel really good to say that I feel like I'm making a healthy step in my life. And that's really all I want for you, that you'd be willing to trust God, to sometimes have direct conversations, to sometimes look at and evaluate your life. And today is the last piece of that series as we look at leadership. The first guy we're looking at is named Joseph. You can write this in. He is an emerging leader in his story. Joseph, in Genesis 39, Joseph is someone who is, as a young man, was sold into slavery because he was hated by his older brothers. Somehow Joseph had gotten a glimpse of God's wisdom and insight, and he very proudly portrayed and explained these things as the youngest in his family, and his older brothers didn't like it. They ended up selling him into slavery. And through that story in his life, he became a leader. And he was young and given and found himself in a very, very destitute, discouraging, and depressing place, being a slave. But he didn't let that stop him from being someone who would be willing to be used by God. He was someone that still served and still led, and that he was even promoted from a slave to in the palace. I'm summarizing his story, but you can read it in Genesis 39. And as he's in the palace, after being a slave, he's promoted up, and he gets accused as an adulterer, and then he gets thrown back into prison, again, lowering his status. But even from prison, he has this way about him where he's continuing to lead, continuing to serve. He's not just saying, woe is me, my circumstances are horrible. God, how could you do this to me? He took that opportunity to learn and to keep growing. And even as a young man in his early 20s, when this is happening, he's still trusting God with the ways he's been gifted and still being willing to be used, even despite highs and lows in his life. And so he has a gift to interpret dreams, which eventually gets him back out of prison, back into the leadership of Pharaoh's courts. And guess what? Years after his brother sold him into slavery, there's a famine in the land that Joseph saw in advance. And so the Pharaoh and the courts were able to store up food. And so people from all over are now coming to Pharaoh to ask for assistance because they've run out of food. Guess who his brothers come and talk to ask for assistance in Pharaoh's home? One big guess. It's Joseph. Joseph has the opportunity and the power to get back and to strike back at his brothers. They don't recognize him, but he sees them walking up. Instead, in a moment of compassion and kindness, he reveals his identity to them. And with hugs and tears and forgiveness, he helps them. He's able to forgive the people that have caused his life to be very difficult, his own brothers. And here's where the scriptures in Genesis 50, it says, his brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. We are your slaves, they said. But Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. I love that verse, Genesis 50:20, that what is meant for evil, only God can use it for good. And here's the key. Joseph, as a young leader, decided to be a problem solver instead of just someone who saw the problems and just said, well, I hope Pharaoh can fix this. He took it into his own hands and said, even in prison, I can be someone of influence. Even in the worst circumstances, as a young leader, I don't have the title, I don't have the knowledge, I definitely don't even have the citizenship. Well, not the citizenship. I definitely don't have the status as a free person. I'm in prison right now. I'm a prisoner. He had all the excuses in the world, and he could have said, there's no way I can ever make this situation better. But as a young emerging leader, he decided to be a problem solver instead of a problem pointer. So that's my encouragement for you. Maybe you are a young leader today. Maybe you're not young, but you are someone who is getting your start in a new career, or you find yourself at the bottom of the corporate ladder and you're starting over in a lot of ways, and you're thinking, one day I will have the title to be able to make a difference. One day I will be a leader. One day I will have the office, the corner office. No. You don't understand. Real leadership can happen right now where you are. You do not have to have the title. You do not have to be the CEO. You don't have to be the boss to lead. You can see the problems, and instead of waiting for someone else to solve them, you can be the one that says, I will solve them. And I will be someone that makes this world better because I didn't just come with a lot of excuses. The emerging leader, that's what we learned from Joseph's life. The next leader we're going to look at is a guy named Jethro. Jethro is what we're calling the mentor leader. Jethro is a mentor leader. He's someone that had a small, we don't know a lot about Jethro, but we know him as Moses' father-in-law. And then there's a moment where Jethro gets a chance to observe Moses as he is a new leader. So Joseph was an emerging leader. Now we're talking about mentorship leaders. Jethro, an older leader who's got some experience, he observes Moses, who is just wearing himself out, trying to solve everything himself. Maybe he's taken Joseph's model and taken it to the extreme, because Moses is leading the entire nation of Israel. And they're all coming to him with all sorts of problems, big problems and little problems. If you've ever been in leadership, you know that there's lots of little problems. And you can be stuck in the weeds trying to help everyone else. The best thing you can do if you are serving under someone is to be a problem solver, like Joseph. But eventually, you need some outside guidance. You need some mentorship. Jethro got a chance to observe Moses in his day-to-day life. Some of the verses here that I'll read talk about this. It won't be on the board. But it says, Moses took his seat to serve as a judge for the people. They stood around him from morning until evening. There's a long line, longer than the DMV. And Moses has got to deal and ask and answer all these questions. And Moses' father-in-law saw what Moses was doing for all the people, and he said, "What is this you are doing for all the people? Why do you alone sit as judge while all these people stand around you?" Moses answered him, "Well, it's because the people come to me to seek God's will. Whenever they have a dispute, it's brought to me, and I decide between the parties and inform them of God's decrees and instructions." Now, Moses, as a unique leader in history, the leader of the nation of Israel, the leader of God's people, he spoke to the people on behalf of God. So yeah, it's important for Moses to know something about God's decrees and instructions, and he felt like it was his responsibility. And here's where you're going to read it on the board. Verse 17, Moses' father-in-law replied, "What you are doing is not good." Jethro had the willingness as a mentor leader to tell Moses straight up, what you are doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear yourselves out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone. Listen to me and I will give you some advice. That's the key word for the mentor leader. Some of us who have some wisdom, have some things we've learned, we're never willing to share that with anyone. We're never willing to stop someone and say, what you are doing is not good. We're not willing to say, I have some advice for you. Either we're waiting to be asked, or we just kind of say, well, hopefully one day someone tells him that he's going to burn himself out. Hopefully one day someone's going to tell her that she can't do everything. She can't be super mom and do this. She's going to have to pick and choose based on the season of her kid's life. But I've been through that, but I'm not willing to say anything. Hopefully someone tells her. You see, what a lack of leadership opportunity that is. If you've learned something, if you've understood something, if you've gone through something and you don't help someone else, even though you could, man, you could help someone out really significantly. Jethro says, you must be the people's representative before God and bring their disputes to him. And so what happens is Jethro helps Moses take his leadership authority and delegate it out to other leaders who are capable in the nation of Israel. And so that way, Moses can only spend his time on the very most important things, while people around him can support him with a lot of the minutia, the details, the big problems that are actually really small things. That way, Moses can focus on the most important things. So what we learn from Jethro's life is if you are a mentor, again, it doesn't have to do with your age. If you've learned something, if you've seen something, you've gone through something before, here's the lesson for you. You must look for opportunities to develop others and to coach them. If you see someone else struggling, they have no idea that they're struggling. They would love your advice if you were brave enough, if you were courageous enough to be direct and say, what you are doing, can I help you out a little bit? It's not good. Here's what you need to change. You're going to burn yourself out, and it's not going to be good for you or anyone else around you. The third leader we're going to be looking at is a guy named Eli. Eli's life as a priest did not match with his home life. Eli worked as a priest, but as we're going to find out shortly, it didn't translate to his leadership at home. In fact, Eli prioritized his church world life more than his family. His story comes from 1 Samuel chapter 2. And here's the big crux of it. Eli is leading as a priest, and a boy named Samuel gets entrusted to Eli as a pseudo-father that is spiritual. So Samuel is born, and his mother had prayed that if I have a son, I'm going to dedicate him to God. God does give her a son named Samuel, and because of her vow, she then entrusts him to be raised in the church. Now, this is a very unique situation, and not everyone did this, but this is what Hannah did for her son. And so Samuel comes in as a young boy, and the person leading at the time was Eli. And so in verse 11, it says, the boy Samuel ministered before the Lord under Eli the priest. And then it tells you, the Bible tells us that in verse 12, it tells us about Eli's home life. It says, Eli's sons were what? Say this out loud. Eli's sons were scoundrels. They had no regard for the Lord. They had no regard. So Eli's a priest, but his home life is a mess. Eli is leading in the church, but his sons have no regard for God. This can happen to those of us who take our career too seriously. Now, you may not be a priest, you may not be a pastor, but maybe as a father, you're really dedicated to your career. Maybe as a mother, you're focusing on your job right now. And sometimes we can justify our busyness in the workplace, and we will say, well, here's how I'm providing for my family. My kids need a roof over their head, right? They need food to eat. They need money for sports uniforms. They need money for tuition. So who's going to earn that? I got to do it. Here's how I'm setting my kids up for success. I'm meeting their financial needs. Now, that's not a wrong thing, and yes, our kids need our help. However, what we can learn from Eli's life is that that's not the most important thing about us. That our world will reward our hard work and our sacrifice at our job. People even around you may applaud you and say, wow, you are so successful in what you do. But then if they were to look behind the curtain and look in your living rooms in the evenings and the conversations and the dinners with you and your family, or maybe the lack thereof, they would kind of see a disconnect, because the leader you are in the workplace and the person you are at home, it's like you're not even there. You're always at the workplace. Even when you're at home, you're thinking about work. If I could be honest with you a little bit, I've loved ministry so much that there was a period before I became senior pastor where God showed me how much ministry was out of whack priority-wise for my own life. And here's how he taught me. He actually taught me through COVID. He taught me through COVID that when everything is said and done and everything is shut down and you're at home, Darren, your most important responsibility is to your wife and to your kids. And that started something in me to really start to pray and to think about how I want to lead in my home. That is the most important thing about me, what I do? Is the most important thing about you, what you do? Now, I can't say that for sure is what led me to the decision that I shared with you earlier, but I'm just saying my own self-awareness journey, I started to ask these questions. The unprioritized leader lesson from Eli is this: does my family get my best? So that's a question I ask myself a lot. Does my family get my best? No matter what I'm doing, no matter what you are doing, your kids, your spouse, your family, your own relationship with God is way more important than your job. But in our world today, and if you're not careful, you will be so focused on what you do that who you are when you clock out of work and when you take a vacation, you don't even know how to take a vacation. You don't even know how to rest because your identity is so wrapped up in your work. Now, there's a judgment that came against Eli, actually because of Samuel's own knowledge from God. Samuel ends up having a dream as a young man, and he hears from God that Eli is going to be held accountable for his own son's mistakes. Here's what it says. At that time, I will carry out against Eli everything I spoke against his family, from beginning to end. For I told him that I would judge his family forever because of the sin he knew about. His sons blasphemed God, and he failed to restrain them. Now, exactly why Eli failed to restrain his sons, we don't know the specifics of, but all we know is that Eli, even as a priest, did not prioritize his family above what he did. And because of that, there was no leadership in his home. And so that's a warning for us, that we would ask, does my family get my best? Do I see home as a place where I'm supposed to be recharged? Or do I see home as a place where I must lead and engage and direct and to think ahead? Some of us as leaders, we think about these things a lot. We have planning and scheduling, but what about in home? What about for your marriage? What about for your future? What about for your finances? We must lead at home more than the workplace. Here's the last leader we're looking at. He's a guy named David. When you think of David, if you've been in the church for a while, you probably think of two things. Him and his adulterous moment with Bathsheba, where he saw a woman bathing, impregnated her, tried to cover it up by having her husband killed in battle. We're not talking about that today. You may also think about David and Goliath, where he, as a very young person, overcame a giant, had bravery, and faced the giant. We're not talking about that either. We're talking about David's heart, David's passion, David's desire to be so inspirational to people around him. You may know that David wrote a lot of the Psalms. He is a poet. He's an artist. He's a musician. He's a unique leader in the history of the Bible because of his heart. In fact, Acts 13:22 says that I have found David, son of Jesse, a man after my own heart. He will do everything I want him to do. Now that is a significant label given to David, that he is known as someone after God's own heart. Now he's not a perfect leader, and his passions and his wanting to be emotionally feeling good a lot probably got him into trouble, like with Bathsheba, like what we just talked about. But you can't deny that David really loved God, that he really cared about God. In fact, there's this moment, what we're talking about today in David's life, is when he was dancing before God. He was dancing, and David wasn't wearing much clothing at the time. And so it would be weird to see a leader of God's kingdom to be leading a parade half naked, but with such joy and passion that he didn't care. But that's exactly where we find David, because it says in verse 14, 2 Samuel, wearing a linen ephod, Darren, I've never done this before. No, David was dancing before the Lord with all his might, while he and all Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouts and sounds of trumpets. So what's happening is they are moving the ark of God, and David is leading this parade. Now, all leaders know that you have to lead, but David took that to another level when he put his heart into what he did. He really cared about it, and other people around him knew it. In fact, he was so out of the box with how he led in this passionate moment that he actually got some criticism from someone close to him. In verse 20, David returned home, and Michal, daughter of Saul, came out to meet him and said, how the king of Israel has distinguished himself today, going around half naked in full view of the slave girls of his servants, as any vulgar fellow would. So here's what you got to know. If you're really passionate about something, you're really excited about something regarding God, most people will not understand it. And in fact, some people will criticize you for it. They will say, how can you be so outspoken about your beliefs? How can you be so passionate about God? This is weird. Why would you ever say that? Why would you ever share your faith at the lunch table at school? Why would you ever invite someone to church from the office? Why would you ever love God enough to where it would change how you spend your money? That's so weird. What's wrong with you? You will receive criticism because of your passion and your desire to love God the way David did. But his response to this accusation said, I will celebrate before the Lord. And here's what he says, I will become even more undignified than this. And I will be willing to be humiliated in my own eyes. David is so passionate about what he does for God that he is willing to even embarrass himself if it means that he can show his love to God. Now, what we're going to learn from David's life is that leadership is inspirational, that your heart matters, that if you really care about God, you really care about what he wants to do in your life, that you wouldn't just sit back and let someone else kind of lead, but if you really care about it, I mean, you're someone you can't help but show it, and that's how David led. Now, why are we talking all about leadership today? Why are we talking about leadership today? Because I believe that all of you here, if you follow Jesus, if you are following Jesus, now you may not be following Jesus yet, which is totally fine, but if you are here, you consider yourself a Christian, here's what you got to know. Jesus himself was the best leader in history. Here's why. Only 3 years of actual work, 3 years of ministry, sparked a worldwide movement that is still continuing today, and that you and I are continuing halfway around the world from where it started, 2,000 years after the fact. That Jesus is such an influential leader that his followers, even today, are willing to put their lives on the line in different countries, to be willing to be imprisoned or to even die for what they believe. What type of leader could ever top what Jesus has done and is doing today? So here's what I want to encourage you to do. If you are following Jesus today, you must know that your main marching orders is to influence your world for him. Here's how I know. Matthew 28:19-20. Jesus' last standing orders for the disciples. He says, therefore go. Say go. Say go. In the online chat, say, therefore go. To follow Jesus, it's an active lifestyle. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. Jesus' last words to his disciples, to go and to continue and to lead. Some of you are saying, well, I could never lead in my life because I'm not in charge, or I'm not old enough, or I don't know enough. Hopefully you read Joseph's story and you saw that even despite being young and being so underprivileged, he still led, and God used him in a mighty way because he believed that he could be someone that changes his world because of his faith. His trust in God caused him to do amazing things. Same with David, same with Jethro, Samuel as well. And so today you are probably wondering, well, leadership, that doesn't apply to me. And I'm telling you, if you follow Jesus, it absolutely does apply to you. You may never be a boss. You may never have a corner office or ever feel like you have a title of leadership. But here's a little secret that you have to know. You can lead and not have any power at all. Surely you have someone in your life that their future could change simply because you asked, hey, can I pray for you? Hey, have you ever read the Bible? Can I read it with you? Hey, do you know anything about God? Do you want to come to church with me? I mean, those are just 3 different sentences, but I have used those sentences throughout my entire life to be a leader for people, to lead them to Jesus. Not everyone says yes, but I'm going to tell you that I will never stop asking those questions because I follow the one who I truly believed can save the world. And when you follow Jesus in that way, you are willing to do stupid things. You're willing to dance in a way that you don't care if people look at you funny. You're willing to act in a certain way. You're willing to try new things. You're willing to take risks. And that's my prayer for you today, that you would continue to trust God enough to let yourself be led into situations and to opportunities that may feel like, I've never done that before. How could I know? Well, you don't know until you try. And I want to encourage you to keep trusting God, to let your faith be stronger than your fear, and that you would take up the life that you have, because it's so short. It's so short, you and I, the life that we have on earth. And we could spend our whole lives waiting. And sometimes God wants us to take the lead wherever we are. Would you pray with me on this? Lord, I pray your best for all of us here. I pray your best for those of us watching, those of us at our Vacaville campus. I pray, Lord, for those of us, Lord, who will continue the things that you are doing in this church, the things you started over 20 years ago in the heart of Pastor John and Pam and that group that had a vision to reach people far from you. And God, what a privilege that vision is what reached me as a 15-year-old. And God, what a privilege, what a celebration that my over 5 years of ministry here has led to many people coming to faith in my personal life and also in the lives of our church. And God, you will continue that story. You will continue that good work. We will look back even after this week and this month and celebrate what you've done and what you will continue to do in this building, in our church, at our online campus, and all of us here. Holy Spirit, would you give us the willingness to trust you to be leaders in our lives, that we wouldn't just look around us and point out problems, that we wouldn't just wait for someone else, that we wouldn't look at other people struggling and not be willing to help them, that we wouldn't just do something if we didn't really feel like it, that we would have passion for what we believe and that we would live it out. And that maybe if we don't have the passion, God, that you would give us a new passion like David, that we could be influential because of inspiration. Holy Spirit, would you be the one guiding and leading? Would you be the one working? Continue to do amazing things through this church. Continue to do amazing, life-changing things through the people here, as you have always done and as you will continue to do. God, we trust you and we have faith in your future, Lord, for us. In your name, amen.